The rifle cracked across the town square. Smoke rose from the barrel as the hangman's platform stood half-finished. Silas Thorne sat in his cell, eyes open but seeing nothing. The noose hung ready above him. The town watched. No one moved. That was the moment the stranger rode into Abilene. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Let me take you back to when it all began. Back to the morning Silas Thorne was accused of murder. Back to when Abilene was just another dusty frontier town with secrets buried deeper than any grave. The sun beat down on Abilene's main street as townsfolk bustled about their business. Blacksmith Silas Thorne worked at his forge, hammer ringing out a steady rhythm against the anvil. Sweat glistened on his forehead as he shaped a horseshoe for the new livery stable down the road. "Hotter than hell today," Silas muttered, wiping his brow with a cloth stained with soot and sweat. He didn't notice the two men approaching until they were at his forge door. One wore a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. The other stood silently behind him, eyes scanning the street. "Silas Thorne?" the sheriff asked, his voice flat. Silas looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun. "That's me. Can I help you?" "Jeremiah Ashworth is dead," the sheriff said, stepping into the forge. "We need you to come with us." Silas's hammer clattered to the floor. "Ashworth? Dead? Why would you think I had anything to do with that?" The sheriff didn't answer. Instead, he gestured to his companion. "Search the premises." Silas watched helplessly as the man began rifling through his tools and materials. "This is nonsense. I've been here all morning. Anyone in town can vouch for me." "We'll be the judge of that," the sheriff said, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "You have the right to remain silent." Silas didn't hear the rest. His mind raced. Jeremiah Ashworth, the wealthiest rancher in 3 counties, dead? And they suspected him? It made no sense. "I demand to see Father Kane," Silas said as they led him from his forge. "He'll tell you I was here this morning." The sheriff only grunted in response as they marched Silas through the center of town. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire through the crowd. No one spoke up in his defense. No one offered to vouch for his whereabouts. The jail cell was cold and dark after the bright sunlight of the forge. Silas sat on the cot, trying to make sense of what had happened. He had no enemies that he knew of, certainly not enough to kill for. The door creaked open an hour later. Sheriff Roy Taggart stood in the doorway, a smirk playing on his lips. "Well, well," he said. "Looks like your luck ran out, Blacksmith." "What are you talking about?" Silas demanded, rising to his feet. "I didn't kill anyone. I was at my forge all morning. Ask anyone." Taggart stepped into the cell, his shadow falling across Silas. "Funny thing about evidence. It has a way of appearing when you least expect it." He held up a blood-stained knife. "Found this in your forge, hidden under the anvil, your fingerprints all over it." Silas stared at the knife in disbelief. "That's not mine. I've never seen that before in my life." Taggart laughed. "Save it for the judge, Thorne. The town's already made up its mind. You killed Ashworth. Now you're going to hang for it." As Taggart left, locking the cell door behind him, Silas sank back onto the cot. He was innocent. But no one seemed to care. The evidence was planted. The witnesses would be bought, and the trial would be a formality. Outside, construction began on the gallows. The hammering of nails echoed through the jailhouse walls. Silas closed his eyes, trying to block out the sound. He needed a plan. He needed someone to believe him. But most of all, he needed time. Time he didn't have. The next morning, Silas was led from his cell to the town square. The gallows stood fully constructed now, a grim monument to injustice. The noose hung ready, swaying gently in the morning breeze. Silas looked out at the crowd that had gathered, faces he recognized from years living in Abilene, people who knew him, people who should have known better than to believe a lie. He didn't struggle as they bound his hands. He didn't beg for mercy. He stood tall, shoulders back, chin raised. If this was how it was going to end, then so be it, but he would die with his dignity intact. As they positioned him on the platform, Silas caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the crowd, a man in a tan cowboy hat with a bright red bandana around his neck. The man said nothing, did nothing, just watched. And then, as the hangman adjusted the noose, the rifle cracked across the town square. Smoke rose from the barrel as the hangman's platform stood half-finished. Silas Thorne sat in his cell, eyes open but seeing nothing. The noose hung ready above him. The town watched. No one moved. That was the moment the stranger rode into Abilene. Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? The stranger dismounted his horse and tied the reins to the hitching post outside the saloon. His eyes scanned the town square, taking in the half-built gallows and the nervous energy of the townsfolk. The air hung thick with unspoken accusations and fear. "Morning," the stranger said to the bartender as he walked inside. "What's all this about the hanging?" The bartender wiped a glass with a rag, avoiding eye contact. "Silas Thorne murdered Jeremiah Ashworth last night." The stranger took a seat at the bar. "And they're sure it was him?" "Found the knife in his forge," a man at the next table interjected. "His knife, with Ashworth's blood on it." The stranger turned slightly. "You were there?" "I saw it with my own eyes," the man said, puffing out his chest. "Sheriff Taggart found it right where Silas kept his tools, hidden under the anvil." "Convenient," the stranger mused. "Convenient?" the bartender scoffed. "Ashworth was the richest man in these parts. Silas owed him money. They argued yesterday at the livery stable. Everyone heard it." The stranger picked up the mug of beer the bartender had placed before him. So Silas had motive and opportunity. What about the witnesses? 3 men saw him leaving Ashworth's ranch around midnight, the bartender said, leaning in closer. They recognized him by his distinctive limp. The stranger took a sip of beer. "Limp? I didn't notice one." "That's because he's been faking it," the bartender said. "Or maybe he's just gotten good at hiding it since the murder." The stranger finished his beer and placed the mug on the bar. "Where can I find Silas now?" "The jail," the bartender said, glancing nervously towards the door. "But I wouldn't recommend talking to him. Sheriff Taggart's not a man who likes questions about his investigations." The stranger nodded and stood up, leaving a coin on the counter. He walked out of the saloon and headed toward the sheriff's office. The townsfolk parted as he passed, their eyes following him with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. As he approached the jail, he saw Sheriff Roy Taggart standing outside, directing 2 men who were reinforcing the gallows. "Morning, Sheriff," the stranger said. Taggart turned, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol. "Can I help you?" "I'd like to talk to Silas Thorne," the stranger said calmly. Taggart's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "The murder," the stranger replied. "I hear he's accused of killing Jeremiah Ashworth." Taggart studied the stranger for a moment, then nodded toward the jail. 5 minutes. That's all you get." As the stranger entered the jail, he noticed the deputy watching him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The cell door creaked open, and there sat Silas Thorne, his hands bound, his face etched with exhaustion. "I didn't do it," Silas said without preamble. The stranger pulled up a stool and sat opposite him. "I heard. What really happened?" Silas shook his head. I was at my forge all evening. Ask anyone. Father Kane can vouch for me. He stopped by around 8. Then why does everyone say you were at Ashworth's ranch? Silas sighed. Because Taggart told them so. He's been after me ever since I saw him taking money from the Widow's Relief Fund. The stranger raised an eyebrow. The Relief Fund? When was this? Last month. He didn't know I saw him, but I did. And now Ashworth's dead, and I'm the one who's going to hang for it. The stranger stood up. I'll be back. As he left the jail, he saw Deputy Cal Pierce watching him from across the street. The deputy quickly looked away when their eyes met. The stranger had a feeling he wasn't the only one in Abilene who knew the truth about Silas Thorne, but he was the only one brave enough to do anything about it. And that's when everything changed. The stranger stepped out of the sheriff's office, the weight of injustice pressing on his shoulders. He knew time was running out for Silas Thorne. The gallows stood ready, and the town seemed eager to see justice served, even if it was served to the wrong man. He needed to talk to someone else, someone who might know more about what really happened to Jeremiah Ashworth. Father Kane came to mind. The priest had tried to defend Silas, but was silenced by Taggart. The church stood at the edge of town, its wooden cross a stark reminder of the spiritual emptiness that filled Abilene these days. The stranger pushed open the heavy oak door and stepped inside. The air smelled of old wood and candle wax. Father Kane, the stranger called out. A man in black robes emerged from a side room. He had kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. Yes? Can I help you? I'm looking for information about Jeremiah Ashworth's murder, the stranger said, keeping his voice low. The priest's expression hardened. I have nothing to say about that matter. I believe Silas Thorne is innocent, the stranger continued, and I believe you know why. Father Kane studied the stranger for a long moment, then nodded. Come with me. He led the stranger to a small office in the back of the church. The space was cramped, filled with books and religious artifacts. Silas came to me yesterday, the priest began, his voice barely above a whisper. He was distraught. He said he had witnessed something terrible. What did he see? Roy Taggart, the priest said, looking around as if afraid of being overheard. Taking money from the Widow's Relief Fund. The stranger's eyes narrowed. When was this? Last month. Silas confronted him about it. Taggart threatened him, said he'd ruin him if he ever spoke of it. And Ashworth's murder? I don't know who killed Ashworth, the priest admitted, but Silas was with me the night of the murder, from 7 until midnight. He helped me prepare for the next day's service. The stranger made a note of this. If Silas was with the priest until midnight, he couldn't have been at Ashworth's ranch when the murder supposedly occurred. Who else might have seen something? The stranger asked. Father Kane hesitated. There's Martha Bellwether. She lives on the edge of town. Ashworth courted her for a time. She might know things she's not saying. The stranger stood up. Where can I find her? Her farm is about a mile out of town, the priest said. But be careful. Taggart has eyes everywhere. The stranger nodded and left the church, his mind racing with new information. Silas had an alibi, but it was too late to present it at the trial. The execution was scheduled for tomorrow morning. He needed more, something that would expose the truth before it was too late. As he walked toward the edge of town, he noticed a woman watching him from her porch. She had a haunted look in her eyes, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. The stranger approached her cautiously. Martha Bellwether? He asked. The woman nodded, her hand clutching the shawl around her shoulders. Who's asking? My name isn't important, the stranger said. I'm looking into Jeremiah Ashworth's murder. Martha's face paled. I have nothing to say about that. Someone does, the stranger pressed gently. "And I think it's you." She looked away, toward the distant hills. "I saw what happened that night, but I can't talk about it. Taggart. He made sure of that." "What did he do?" "He threatened my children," Martha whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Said something terrible would happen to them if I opened my mouth." The stranger felt a cold anger building inside him. "What did you see, Martha?" "I saw Roy Taggart leaving Ashworth's ranch that night," she finally confessed. "They were arguing about something. Money, I think. Then I heard a shot. When I went to investigate, Taggart was gone, and Ashworth was dead." The stranger's blood ran cold. Taggart was the killer, and he had framed Silas to cover his tracks. The pieces were falling into place, but he still needed proof, something that would convince the townsfolk of the truth before Silas hanged. He needed to find that proof before sunrise, because tomorrow Silas Thorne would die unless he could expose the real killer. And he had to do it before Taggart's men silenced him permanently. The sun was setting as the stranger made his way back toward town. Martha's words echoed in his mind. Taggart leaving Ashworth's ranch, the argument about money, the shot that ended a life. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. He needed proof. Something that couldn't be explained away. He stopped at the livery stable where Silas had supposedly confronted Ashworth the day before. The owner, a man named Hank, was just closing up for the night. "Excuse me," the stranger said. "I'm looking into the murder. You mentioned seeing Silas and Ashworth arguing yesterday?" Hank nodded nervously. "That's right. Around noon, Silas was furious, said Ashworth cheated him on a horseshoe order." "What were they arguing about exactly?" "Money, mostly. Silas said he'd worked for weeks on a special set of shoes for Ashworth's prized stallion. When he went to collect payment, Ashworth told him the horse had died. No payment, no explanation." The stranger filed this away. "And you saw Silas leave?" "Yep. Headed back toward his forge. Looked mighty upset." The stranger thanked Hank and continued on his way. He needed to find the 3 witnesses who claimed to see Silas at Ashworth's ranch the night of the murder. According to the bartender, they all identified Silas by his limp. But Silas didn't have a limp. The stranger had seen him walk normally just that morning. Someone was lying. And they had been paid to do it. He found one of the witnesses, a man named Jed, at the saloon. The man was halfway through a bottle of whiskey when the stranger approached. "Jed, I hear you saw Silas Thorne at Ashworth's ranch the night he was killed." Jed looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "That's right. Me and 2 others. Saw him plain as day. Even recognized him by his limp." The stranger leaned in closer. "Silas doesn't have a limp. I saw him walking this morning. No limp at all." Jed suddenly seemed sober. "Well, maybe I was mistaken. It was dark, and I'd had a few." "Someone paid you to say that, didn't they?" Jed's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." The stranger placed a coin on the table. "Just tell me who, and I'll leave you alone." Jed glanced around nervously before leaning in. "Taggart came to me yesterday. Offered me $50 to say I saw Silas at the ranch. Said it was for justice." "Did he mention anything about Silas's limp?" "No, but he did say something strange. Told me to make sure I described Silas correctly. Gave me a sketch. Looked different than the Silas I know." The stranger's mind raced. Taggart had prepared a false description of Silas to match what the witnesses would say. But why go to such lengths if he had the knife as evidence? Unless the knife wasn't enough. Unless he needed to make sure the witnesses' stories matched the evidence perfectly. He needed to find the other 2 witnesses, and he needed to get to Silas's forge before Taggart's men did something to cover their tracks. As he stepped out of the saloon, he saw two men watching him from across the street. They weren't townsfolk. The way they moved, the way they scanned their surroundings, they were professionals, and they were waiting for him. The stranger ducked down an alley, his heart pounding. He was getting too close. Taggart knew it, and he wasn't going to let the stranger interfere. The alley was dark and narrow. Trash bins lined one wall. The sound of footsteps echoed behind him. They had followed him. He drew his pistol, the cold metal a familiar weight in his hand. He had one shot at this, and he knew it. The stranger pressed himself against the cold brick wall of the alley, his hand steady on the pistol grip. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Two figures emerged from the darkness, their faces shadowed but their intentions clear. "Hand over whatever you found," one of them growled. The stranger didn't move. "I don't have anything." "Liar," the second man said, stepping forward. "Taggart sent us. He knows you're asking questions." Taggart. The name hung in the air like smoke. The stranger's mind raced. He had the pieces now. Silas's alibi with Father Kane, Martha's testimony of seeing Taggart at the ranch, the paid witnesses lying about the limp. But he still needed concrete proof that would stand up in front of the whole town. "What did Taggart do with the relief fund money?" the stranger asked, keeping his voice even. The men exchanged a glance. "What money?" "The widow's fund," the stranger pressed. "Silas saw Taggart taking it." One of the men laughed. "You're way out of your league, stranger. That money's gone. Spent on whiskey and whores." The stranger's finger tightened on the trigger. "Tell Taggart I'm coming for him, and I'm bringing the truth with me." The men didn't wait for more. They turned and disappeared back into the shadows as quickly as they'd appeared. The stranger didn't follow. He had what he needed now, confirmation that Taggart was stealing from the town's most vulnerable people. He made his way back to Silas's forge under the cover of darkness. The place was dark and quiet, but he could sense someone had been there recently. Tools were out of place. The anvil had been moved. He searched carefully, his fingers tracing along the floorboards. And then he found it, a loose board beneath the workbench. Prying it up, he revealed a small compartment. Inside was a leather pouch containing documents and a ledger. The ledger showed Taggart's embezzlement from the relief fund. The documents were receipts for the purchases made with the stolen money, signed by Taggart himself. This was the proof he needed. Something that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as hearsay. As he pocketed the evidence, he heard footsteps approaching. Not from the alley this time, but from the street. He ducked behind the forge just as the door creaked open. Taggart stood there, a lantern in one hand, a pistol in the other. "I know you've been asking questions, stranger," he said, his voice cold as winter. "And I know you found something." The stranger didn't move. "You framed an innocent man." Taggart laughed, a harsh sound in the quiet night. "Ashworth was going to expose me. The blacksmith just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time." "Wrong place," the stranger challenged. "You were the one stealing from widows and orphans." Taggart's face darkened. "That money was mine by right. I earned it." "By terrorizing this town?" the stranger asked, stepping out from behind the forge. "By killing an honest man?" Taggart raised his pistol. "You should have stayed out of this, stranger." The stranger didn't flinch. "The truth has a way of coming out, Taggart, and when it does—" He didn't finish the sentence, because in that moment, Taggart fired. The bullet whizzed past the stranger's head, embedding itself in the wall behind him. And that's when everything changed. The bullet whizzed past the stranger's ear, embedding itself in the wall behind him. Taggart cursed and fired again. This time, the stranger moved. He dove behind the workbench as the second shot splintered the wood where he'd been standing. "You can't hide forever, stranger," Taggart's voice echoed through the forge. The stranger peeked over the edge of the bench. Taggart was reloading his pistol. The stranger had seconds. He grabbed the ledger and documents from his pocket and tucked them into his vest. Then he spotted the window at the back of the forge, his escape route. As Taggart raised his pistol again, the stranger threw a handful of metal scraps toward the front of the shop. The clattering noise distracted Taggart just long enough for the stranger to dive through the window. He landed hard on the ground outside, rolling to avoid the bullets that followed. He was out in the open now. No cover. Taggart's men would be on their way. The stranger sprinted toward the edge of town, his heart pounding. He had the proof now. The ledger showing Taggart's theft from the relief fund. The receipts signed by Taggart himself. But it wasn't enough yet. Not to convince an entire town that had already condemned Silas. He needed Martha Bellwether's testimony. She had seen Taggart leaving Ashworth's ranch the night of the murder. She had heard the shot. But she was terrified of what Taggart might do to her children. The stranger found Martha's house just as dawn was breaking. She was already awake, her face pale with fear when she saw him approaching. "They're looking for you," she whispered, pulling him inside. "Taggart's men have been asking questions about you all night." The stranger nodded. "I know. I need you to come forward. Tell the town what you saw." Martha shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I can't. Taggart threatened my children." "Taggart won't hurt anyone once the truth is out," the stranger said gently. "And it will be out. Today." He showed her the ledger. "This proves he's been stealing from the relief fund, the same fund that was supposed to help widows like you." Martha's eyes widened as she recognized her name among the records of stolen funds. "He took my money too? The money that was supposed to help my husband's grave?" "He stole from everyone," the stranger said, "including you, including Silas." Something hardened in Martha's eyes. "I'll testify," she said, her voice suddenly strong. "I'll tell them everything I saw." The stranger nodded. "Good, because at sunrise tomorrow, Silas Thorne dies unless we stop it." And that's when everything changed. The town square was already packed when the stranger rode in at dawn. The gallows stood tall against the morning sky, a grim reminder of the injustice about to unfold. Silas Thorne stood on the platform, his hands bound, his face pale but determined. "Any last words, Blacksmith?" the hangman asked, adjusting the noose. Silas shook his head. "I'm innocent. That's all I have to say." The stranger dismounted and walked through the crowd, his red bandana a stark contrast to the somber mood. He spotted Martha Bellwether near the front, her hands trembling but her jaw set. Deputy Cal Pierce stood near the sheriff's office, watching with a mixture of fear and hope. Sheriff Taggart stood at the base of the gallows, a smirk on his face. "Let's get this over with. The town has had enough of this nonsense." As the hangman prepared to place the noose around Silas's neck, the stranger stepped forward. "Sheriff Taggart, before you proceed, there's something the town should see." Taggart turned, his smile fading. "This is not the time for your games, stranger." "I think it's exactly the time," the stranger said, pulling the ledger from his vest. "This belongs to you." He held up the book, its pages filled with damning evidence. "This shows how you've been stealing from the relief fund. Money meant for widows like Martha Bellwether. Money that was supposed to help the most vulnerable in this town." A murmur spread through the crowd. Martha stepped forward. "It's true. I saw him take it. And I saw him leaving Ashworth's ranch the night he was killed." Taggart's face turned pale. "Lies! All of it!" "You're the one who's lying," the stranger said. Silas was with Father Kane the night of the murder. He couldn't have been at Ashworth's ranch, but you could! The crowd gasped. Taggart reached for his pistol. You can't prove anything! I don't have to, the stranger said. You just did, by reaching for that weapon instead of defending yourself. Taggart's eyes darted around, looking for an escape route. This is nonsense. I'll have you all arrested. But it was too late. Deputy Cal Pierce stepped forward, his own pistol drawn. I'm placing you under arrest, Sheriff, for murder and theft. Taggart cursed and fired his pistol. The bullet missed and hit the gallows post. In that moment, the truth was clear for all to see. The sheriff was guilty, and Silas Thorne was innocent. As Taggart was led away, Silas was untied. The crowd erupted in cheers, but Silas only had eyes for the stranger. Thank you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. The stranger nodded. Just doing what's right. And then, before anyone could ask his name, the stranger turned and rode out of Abilene, leaving justice behind, but taking no credit for it. The crowd erupted in cheers as Silas Thorne stepped down from the gallows. His hands were untied, and he took a deep breath of fresh air, the first in days. The stranger watched from the edge of the square, his red bandana standing out against the sea of townsfolk. Deputy Cal Pierce approached Silas, his face filled with relief. You're free, Mr. Thorne. The charges against you have been dropped. Silas nodded, his eyes searching the crowd until they found the stranger. I owe you everything, he said, walking towards the nameless man. The stranger shook his head. Just doing what's right. Taggart was led away in handcuffs, his face pale with fury. This isn't over, he spat as he passed Silas. The law will see me freed. Father Kane stepped forward. Not this time, Sheriff. The truth has a way of coming out. Martha Bellwether embraced Silas, tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry I didn't speak sooner. The stranger turned and walked toward his horse, leaving the celebration behind. He had done what he came to do. Justice had been served. No thanks were needed. No recognition was wanted. His work was done. As he mounted his horse, Silas called out to him. At least tell me your name. The stranger tipped his hat, but didn't answer. He clicked his heels, and his horse began to move through the crowd, parting the townsfolk like the sea. Where are you going? Silas asked. The stranger didn't look back. West. And with that, he rode out of Abilene, leaving behind a town that had found its justice, and a man who had found his freedom. The sun beat down on the dusty road as the stranger rode toward the horizon. His work was done, but somewhere in the vast frontier, another injustice was waiting, and he would be there to face it when it came. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who needs to hear this today. Your support is what brings these stories to more people.